Anxious money thoughts happen when you're worried, nervous, or on edge, and it shows up by spiraling about your money. This is a super common thing that happens to all of us at different points in our lives, but just because it's common doesn't mean it's not annoying as all get out. In this video, I'm going to share with you how to work on dialing down those anxious thoughts when it comes to money so you can sleep calmly at night and interact with your money without freaking out. Let's go. If you're new here, my name is Lindsay. I'm a certified financial therapist and licensed social worker, and I help people at the intersection of money and mental health. In my book, The Financial Anxiety Solution, I break down the common reasons why money anxiety shows up and help people understand how to work through those money anxieties so they can have a healthy relationship with money. In this series, I'm going to talk about anxious thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and mistakes because those are the most frequently asked questions when it comes to dealing with financial anxiety. If you're thinking about a white elephant all the time and I tell you, just stop thinking about that white elephant, it's going to be really, really frustrating. But if I instead say, hey, every time you think about that white elephant, try thinking about a pink one instead. It's going to be easier. I know this is a really non-money related example, but the idea here is that stopping thinking about a thing is really, really hard, but instead switching how we think about things is much easier because we can't control what thoughts pop up in our head. Instead, what we can do is change how we respond to those thoughts as they come up. So when it comes to financially anxious thoughts, the problem is that when we have an anxious thought, much like if we have an anxious feeling or behavior or make a financial mistake, they tend to kind of spiral out of control. And something that is somewhat small, or at least somewhat contained and we can manage it, suddenly becomes this really big, overwhelming thing that becomes really challenging to face and lovingly change. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to work through an example of a financially anxious thought. I'll share with you some different ways you might think about reframing it, and then I'll show you how we reframe it toward the end. In therapy, we lump together a cluster of thoughts that we call cognitive distortions. I like to think of these as sticky thoughts rather than cognitive distortions because we've all experienced these types of sticky thoughts. They are thoughts that get stuck in our head. They're really hard to change, they're really irritating, and they just keep spiraling right back around. First thing, anytime we're trying to change something is to first label it and identify it and notice it. Here are some different ways that those sticky thoughts can show up. The first way is called all or nothing thinking or black and white thoughts. This is the idea that things are either right or they're wrong, they're good or they're bad. And when it comes to money, this type of black and white thinking can sound like, since I blew last month's budget, there's no point in even trying. You're either good at your budget or you're bad and there's no space for in between. And this type of sticky thought can get really challenging to push back on because we get stuck categorizing things as either good or bad instead of really holding space for all the nuance that life has. The next one is called a mental filter. This is when we only pay attention to certain parts of a situation or a scenario and we kind of gloss over all of the good things that are going on and really just hone in on the negative things. So if we think about this as a mental filter, it's as though we've got all of the nuance kind of coming in and floating in, but the mental filter kind of catches all the good stuff and we get stuck only really seeing the bad stuff. A mental filter around money might sound like, yeah, I paid off my credit card, but that doesn't mean anything because I can't pay for my student loans. Rather than seeing the nuance in a situation like this where yes, you've paid off your credit card, and yes, you still have student loans. It doesn't mean it's good or bad. So it's kind of another version of this black or white or all or nothing thinking. Jumping to conclusions is another sticky thought. It's where we kind of imagine that we can predict the future or imagine what's going to happen. And rather than staying here in the moment, we fast forward into what we think might happen. So an example of financial anxiety showing up as jumping to conclusions might look like your boss requested a meeting with you, and rather than pausing to consider all the different reasons your boss might have requested a meeting with you, you jump to, I'm certainly getting fired. It's because I didn't go to that optional lunch and learn or that after work volunteer day, and I'm definitely getting fired, right? We jump to conclusions, we predict the future, we imagine we know what's happening, rather than just going, yeah, it could be that I'm getting fired. Worst case scenario, probably happening. Or it could be there's a new project that they want me to take on, or we're hiring somebody new and they want to know about my capacity to onboard someone. There are many, many different reasons a boss might request a meeting. Another type of sticky thought is called emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning is this idea that if we feel a certain way, that feeling must be true, rather than noticing that a feeling is simply a feeling and we can kind of get curious about what's going on, but it doesn't necessarily predict the truth of the situation. For example, if I feel dumb, I must be dumb. Shoulding yourself, the word should and then ing, I know it can get a little messy over audio sometimes, but shoulding yourself is essentially saying, I should do this, I must do that, is a type of judgment that we put on ourselves. These types of judging words make us feel like we've already messed up or we've already failed or we haven't adhered to the type of standards that we believe we are capable of. Judging ourselves for our behaviors. For example, I should have known better than walking up and down Main Street where my favorite boutiques are when I'm trying to stick to a budget. Another one is minimization, which is really interesting when it comes to anxious financial thoughts, is that we minimize all of the positive or the neutral things that have gone on. Again, it's kind of like this mental filter, but we downplay any of our own successes, right? It's easy for us to say, yeah, I'm going to cheer on my friend when they got a raise at work, but for me, yeah, I got a raise, but it's only because I clock in and clock out, right? We don't give ourselves any credit for what we've done. Now we've got an example of all of the different ways that our thoughts get stuck with those sticky thoughts. So first we want to notice, when is the thought coming up and am I falling into any of those cognitive distortions or thinking traps, sticky thoughts? And we want to see if we can push back on those types of thoughts without flipping into Pollyanna, everything is sunshine and rainbows. Anytime we flip from super negative to super positive, our brain goes, you lying to me. And it's really hard to get our brain on board. So instead, we want to kind of get our scientific method hat on and start to take a broader view of our financial landscape to see where the nuance lies. And then we can ask ourselves, how true is this thought? How false is this thought? That's that scientific method. So with this thought, I'll never raise my credit score, we want to take a look at how true is that? How false is that? What proof or what evidence do we have for that type of thought? And what proof or evidence do we have against that type of thought? And you want to start creating a list of all the different things that prove that you'll never raise your credit score and a list of things that prove that you might actually be able to raise your credit score. On that list of things that are true about that credit score never being able to be raised, you might say, I tried in the past and my score didn't raise. Or I tried to ask for a credit line increase to decrease my credit utilization ratio and I was told no. So you might have some proof that you won't be able to raise your credit score based on those things. But then on the other side of things that you may have done that show that maybe you can raise your credit score, it might be saying things like, I've started paying my credit card bills in full and on time. That's proof that I might be able to raise my credit score. Or I've listened to a handful of podcasts about how our credit scores are calculated. And now I've learned some different things that maybe I wasn't doing before that I could start doing. So now we have a little bit more of a nuanced landscape around this thought. Another thing you can do when you're experiencing financially anxious thoughts is to ask yourself, what would I say to a friend? And sometimes people get weird about the friend thing because we all have friends in our lives that we can be incredibly blunt and direct with. So maybe think about what would you say to a person you really care about and you're going to be kind to. So for example, if a friend came to you and said, oh my gosh, Lindsay, I'm never going to be able to raise my credit score. Would you say, you're right, you're always going to have a score of 535? No, probably not. Yes, of course, you'd meet them where they're at. You'd say, yeah, that's tough. I'm sorry you're feeling that way. And as a friend, you'd say oh my gosh, don't beat yourself up. Credit scores are super complicated. They're super frustrating. Not everything that we do financially fits into our credit score, and it is annoying. And what are some of the things we can do to help you figure out how to raise that score? I think it's helpful to think about the positive benefits of anxious thoughts. This is not me trying to gaslight you into feeling anxious all the time and just be like, yay, I feel anxious all the time. That's great. But more, I want you to think about what research has found around temporary instances of stress and how our brains temporarily can respond to stress in a positive way. There is a researcher named Aaliyah Crum, and she looks at the way that we look at the way we're experiencing stress can shape the way that we respond to stress. One of the studies she did was that she went into a financial institution and took their employees, obviously with consent, and broke them into two groups. And in those two groups, she took one group and showed them a video and talked to them about the benefits of stress or the enhancing impact of stress. And then for the other group, she showed them a video and talked to them about how stress is harmful and debilitating. The interesting thing here is both of the facts that she shared with each research group was true. Stress can be beneficial and stress can be harmful. But when she took them and said, stress is good or stress is bad, what happened after a week was in the group that got the video and got the information about the enhancing benefits of short-term stress, they actually showed on a public speaking task that their physiological responses to that public speaking task were better. Their cortisol level literally didn't raise as high as it did in the other group when she had them do the exact same public speaking task. The cortisol rate, or the stress hormone, was much higher in the group that was told for a week how bad stress was. What does this have to do with financial anxiety and your money stress? If you can think about some of the positive short-term associations with stress, the increase in responsiveness, creativity, resilience, and how we can think about that as a short-term benefit, it might actually help us reframe our anxious thoughts with money. So let's take that thought, I'm terrible at credit, or I'm never going to understand it, or I'm never going to be able to raise it. Now, we've gone through the sticky thoughts. We have looked at that thought with a scientific lens. We've thought about how we might talk to a friend who's experiencing that situation and how we might exude compassion and kindness. And we thought about the short-term benefits of stress. That new thought might be, even though the factors that impact my credit score are sort of confusing, I know that I can pat myself on the back for the fact that I've paid my credit card bills in full and on time. And my hope is that over time, I can call my credit card issuers to ask for an increase so that I can hopefully also increase my credit score. See how different that is? That nuanced thought? We want to be considering all of the nuances when we experience a financially anxious thought. So what do we do with this? We want to first test out this thought in neutral situations. If you're logging into Credit Karma or Credit Sesame, that might be a high anxiety situation for this new thought to have to be employed. Instead, we want to practice this thought in really neutral situations. Maybe when you're brushing your teeth, you're going to write down that thought and read that thought out loud. Or maybe you keep it in your notes app on your phone and you periodically glance at it throughout the day. We want your brain to start experiencing that reframed thought before we're really stressed out. And then the idea is that when we experience a financially anxiety-provoking situation, such as checking your credit score or applying for a new loan, you've already practiced that new thought and your brain isn't feeling like it's such a shock to the system. Anytime we're talking about a thought reframe, I don't want it to land on you as this is individually your fault and you personally need to be responsible for fixing it. Especially when we're using an example like credit scores that are incredibly convoluted and have historically been harmful for large swaths of people. We want to be mindful that yes, you can work really hard to reframe your thoughts, and we still want to advocate for change on a societal level. We want to make sure that financial products are available to people that are not predatory, things like payday loans, wildly high interest rates on credit cards. We want to make sure that we advocate for things like paying your rent in full and on time is tied to the benefit of increasing your credit score. Similarly, things like your energy bill, phone bill, anything where you're paying a bill in full on time, we want that to be included in our credit score. So we want to be advocating for those changes as well. So it's not just think happy thoughts and then you'll feel better. It's also what can we do as individuals to improve our relationship with money while making sure we're holding accountable the system in which we live in and asking and advocating for it to be much more inclusive and accessible. If you liked this video, you can check out my book, The Financial Anxiety Solution. It's a workbook full of lots of exercises just like the one that we did today to help you have a healthier, less anxious relationship with money. Stay tuned for my next video where we'll be getting into how to deal with those financially anxious feelings. I'll see you there.